In each of the following pair, the first state an intrinsic fact about an object, and the second state an observer relative fact about a very same object. Intrinsic fact: the object is a stone. Observer relative: the object is a paper boat. Intrinsic: the moon caused the tides. Observer relatives: the moon is beautiful tonight. Intrinsic fact: earthquakes often occur when tectonic plates meet. Observer relative: earthquakes are bad for our real estate values. I want this distinction to seem quite obvious because it is going to turn out a social reality in a journal can be understood only in a light of distinction. Observer relative features are always created by intrinsic mental phenomena of the user, observer, etc. of an object in a question. Those mental phenomena are, like all mental phenomena, ontologically subjective, and the observer relative feature inherit that ontological subjectivity. But this ontological subjectivity does not prevent the claims about observer relative features from being epistemically objective. Notice that in 1a and 3b the observer relative statement is epistemically objective, in a 2b it is a subjective. These points illustrate the way in which all three distinctions cut across each other: the distinction between the intrinsic and the observer relative, the distinction between the ontological objective and subjective, and the distinction between the epistemic objectivity and subjectivity. It is a logical consequence of an account of a distinction as I have so far given it that for any observer relative feature f seeming to be f is logically prior to being f, because appropriately understood, seeming to be f is a necessary condition of being f. If we understand this point, we are well on the road to understand the ontology of socially created reality. Heading: the assignment of function. My main objective in this chapter is to assemble the apparatus necessary to account for a social reality within our overall scientific ontology. This requires exactly three elements: the assignment of function, collective intentionality, and constitutive rules. Later in chapter 6, to explain the causal function and institutional structure, we will introduce a fourth element: the background of capacities that humans have for coping with their environment. In explaining these notions, I am perforce in a kind of hermeneutic circle. I have to use institutional fact to explain the institutional facts. I have to use rules to explain rules and language to explain a language. But the problem is expository, not logical. In exposition of the theory, I rely on the reader's understanding of the phenomena to be explained. But in actual explanation given, there is no circularity. The first piece of theoretical apparatus I need, I will call the assignment or imposition of function. To explain this, I begin by noting the remarkable capacities that human and some other animals have to impose function on object, both naturally occurring object and those created especially to perform the assigned functions. As far as our normal experiences of the inanimate parts of the world are concerned, we do not experience a thing as a material object, much less as a collection of molecules. Rather, we experience a world of chair and table, house and cars, lecture halls, pictures, streets, garden, houses, and so forth. Now, all the terms I have just used involve criteria of assignment that are internal to the phenomena in a question under the description. but not internal to the entitles under the description material object. Even a natural phenomena such as a river and a tree can be assigned function and thus assigned as a good or a bad depending on what function we choose to assign to them and how well they serve those functions. This is necessary feature of intentionally I am calling the assignment or imposition of function. In the case of some artifact, we build the object to serve a function. Chair, bathtub, computer are obvious examples. In the case of many natural occurring objects such as rivers, tree, we assign a function aesthetic, practical and so on to a pre-existing object. We say the river is good to swim in, or the type of a tree can be used for a lumber. The important thing to see at this point is that a function are never intrinsic to the physics of phenomena but are assigned from outside by a conscious observer and a user. Functions in short are never intrinsic but are always observer relative. We are blinded to the fact by the practice, especially in biology, of talking of functions as if they were intrinsic to nature, but except for those parts of nature that are conscious, nature knows nothing of function. It is, for example, intrinsic to nature that the heart pump blood cause it a course through the body. It is also an intrinsic fact of nature that movement of the blood is related to a whole lot of other causal process having to do with the survival of the organism. But when in addition to say the heart pump blood, we say the function of the heart is to pump blood, we are doing something more than recording these intrinsic facts. We are situating these facts relative to a system of value that we hold. It is intrinsic to us that we hold these values, but the attributes of these values to nature, independent of us, is an observer relative. Even when we discover a function in a nature, as when we discovered the function of a heart, the discovery consists in the discovery of the causal process together with the assignment of teleology of those causal processes. This is shown by the fact that the whole vocabulary of a success and a failure is now appropriate, that it's not appropriate to a simple brute fact of nature. Thus, we can speak a malfunction, heart disease, and a better and a worse heart. We do not speak of better and a worse stone, unless of course we have assigned a function to a stone. If we use the stone as a weapon or a paperweight or an object, for example, we can assess its adequacy under these functional description. This point has to be understood precisely. We do indeed discoveries, functions in natures, but the discovery of a natural function can take place only within a set of prior assignment of value, including a purpose, teleology, and other function. Thus, given that we already accept that for organism there is a value in a survival and reproduction, and for a species there is a value in a continued existence, we can discover that the function of the heart is to pump blood. The function of vestibular ocular reflex is to stabilize the retinal image, and so on. When we discover such a natural function, there is no natural fact discovered beyond the causal fact. Part of what the vocabulary of function add to the vocabulary of cause is a set of values, including a purpose and teleology generally. It is because we take it for granted in a biology that life and survivals are value that we can discover that the function of the heart is to pump blood. If we if we thought the most important value in the world was glorify God by making thumping noise, then the function of the heart would be make thumping noise, and the noisier heart would be better heart. If we value the death and extinction above all, then we would say that a function of a cancer is to speed death. The function of aging would be hasten death, and the function of natural selection would be extinction. In all these function assignment, no new intrinsic fact are involved. As far as nature is concerned, intrinsically there are no functional facts beyond the causal facts. The further assignments of function is observer relative. One of Darwin's greatest achievements was to drive a teleology out of the account of origin of species. One of Darwinian account evolution occurs by a way of blind, brute natural forces. There is no intrinsic purpose whatever to the origin and a survival of biological species. We can arbitrarily define the function of biological process relative to the survival of organism. But the idea that any such assignment of function is a matter of discovery of an intrinsic teleology in a nature, and that functions are therefore intrinsic, is always subject to a variant, most open question argument. What is so functional about a functions so defined? Either a function is defined in a term of cause, in which case there is nothing intrinsically functional about functions. They are just a cause like any others. Or the functions are defined in a terms of furtherance of a set of values that we hold: life, survival, reproduction, health, in which case they are observed were relative. So I realize that many biological and philosophers of biology will disagree. Over the past few decades, there has developed a large literature on a function and a functional explanation. Much of it influenced by a Larry Wright articles in which he defined function as follow: the function of x is z means x is there because it does z, and z is a consequence or a result of x being there. If such an analysis were correct, it would eliminate the observer relative of function. Intuitively, the idea of defining a function in a term of causation, x perform the function f just in a case x cause f. At least a part of explanation for a x existence is that the cause f. Thus, for example, the heart has function of pumping the blood because it does pump blood, and the explanation for existence of heart is evolutionary history is that they do in fact pump blood. This seems give a naturalistic definition of a function whereby the function would be instinct. Ruth Millikan has a similar but more complex idea in her notion of proper function. Through she insists that she is not trying to analyze the ordinary use of notion of function, but to introduce a new technology, a new technical expression defining the term reproduction and causing. So construct no one could object You can introduce any technical term you like. It is simpler to emphasize that such a definition failed to capture a certain essential feature of the ordinary notions of function. To ordinary notion of functions. I lost the page where I reading. First, I'm beginning again. You can introduce any new technical term you like. However, it is important to emphasize that such a definition failed to capture a certain essential feature of the ordinary notion of function for at least three reasons. First, in a Millikan's case, it makes the definition of function dependent on a particular causal historical theory about reproduction. So, in fact, I believe my heart function to pump blood, and I also believe in Darwin's account of how reproduction gives a causal historical account of the evolution of heart. But even if no such account of reproduction, Darwinian or otherwise, turn out to be true, my heart would still function to pump blood. On her definition, the very meaning of claim that the heart has a proper function of pumping blood can be explained only in a term of a causal historical account of how heart are reproduced, and that cannot be a right as far as our ordinary notion of function is concerned. Second, if we take such a definition as a capturing the essential feature of our ordinary notion, there are a counterexample to the analysis. On Wright's account, and apparently the Millikan's as well, we would have to say that the function, proper or otherwise, of cold is to spread a cold germs. They do in fact spread a cold germs, and if they did not spread cold germs, they would not exist. But on our ordinary notion, cold do not have any function, or if they do, it is certainly not to spread germs. Third, the normative component of a function is left unexplained. Through analysis such as a Millikan's can account for the fact that some entities that have a function do not in fact carry out the function. The reduction of function to causal notions still leaves out the normative components. Why do we talk malfunctioning heart, or a heart disease of a better and worse heart? The usual dilemma shows up. Either we are talking about a brute blind causal relation in which a case heart pumping a blood and a cold spreading germs are in a same basket, or we think there is something really functional about a functions, in which case the type of definitions leave out to be an observer relative feature. Another and perhaps a decisive clue that the functions, unlike cause, are observed relatives, that a functional attribution, unlike a causal attribution, are intentional with an substitution of a corporational terms in a function context fail to guarantee the preservations of truth value. Thus, the function of A is to X together with Xing is identical with Y do not implying the function of A is to Y. For example, it is a trivially true that the function of oars is to row with, and rowing consists in exerting pressure on a water relative suffix fulcrums. But it is not the case that a function or oars is to exert a pressure on a water relative to a fixed fulcrums. To summarize the first feature, we need to note in our discussion of the capacity of conscious agent to create a social fact is that assignment of a function to an object to a other phenomena, function are never intrinsic. They are assigned relative to an interest of user and observers. I have not attempted to analyze the sentence from the function is of x is to y into logically necessary and sufficient condition, but I'm calling attention to certain central conditions. First, whatever the function of x is to y, x and y are a part of a system, where the system is in a part of a defining by a purpose, goal and value generally. This is why there are a function of policemen and the professors, but not a function of a humans as such, unless we think of a humans as a part of some larger system where their function is to serve God. Is at the last I told us to serve God. This is the example where the function is, for example, to serve God. Second point, where the function is to x is to y, then x is supposed to cause or otherwise result in y. The normative component in a function cannot be reduced to cause then alone, to which in fact happen as a result of x, because x can have the function of y even in a case where x failing to bring about y all or even most of a time. Thus the function of a safety valves is to prevent explosion, and this is the true even for a values that are so badly made so badly made that they in fact fail to prevent explosions. For example, the malfunctions. The examples we have considered so far suggest further distinctions between agentive and non-agentive functions. Sometimes the assignment of function has to do with immediate purpose, where a practice, gastronomic, ethical, educational, or whatever. When we say the stone is a paperweight, the object is a screwdriver, or this is a chair, these three function notions marks the uses to which we put object, functions that we do not discover and that do not occur naturally, but they are assigned relative to the practical interest of a conscious agent. Not all these interests are particle in any ordinary sense, because such a functions are always assigned. When we say that is an ugly painting, be casual, all these an instance of use to which an agent instantially put object. I will call them agent functions. Some of object to which we assign an agentive function are naturally occurring, such as a stone that we use as a paperweight. Some are artifacts made especially to perform these functions, such as a chair, screwdriver, or oil painting. An object manufactured to perform an agentive function can be used to perform another as a reported. For example, the hammering is my paperweight. As in the case of my heart, the function is not instinct to the object in addition to its causal relations, but in contrast to ascript of function is to this heart. In these cases, the ascriptions of function ascribe to use to which we intensely put these objects. Some functions are not imposed an object to serve a practical purpose, but are assigned to naturally occurring object and process as a part of theoretical account of phenomena in a question. Thus we say the heart functions to pump blood when we are giving an account of how organisms live and survive, relative to a tautology that values survivals and reproduction. We can discover such a function occur in nature independently of a practical intentions and activities of a human agent. So let us call these functions non-agentive functions. There is no sharp divide line between two, and sometimes an agentive functions can be replaced non-agentive functions, as when for example we make an artificial heart. It is generally, through by no means always, the case that agentive functions require a continuous intentionality on the part of the users for their maintenance, whereas non-agentive functions continue to chug functionally along without any effort on our part. Thus, the bathtubs, coins, screwdriver require a continuous use on our part in order to function as a bathtub, coin, and screwdriver. But hearts and levers continue to function as a heart and lever even when no one is paying any attention. Furthermore, the person actually using some object for an agentive function may not be an agent who actually impose the function on that object and may even be unaware that object has a function. Thus, most car drivers are probably unaware that the function of the drive shaft is to transmit power from the transmission to the axis. But all the same, that is agentive functions. One more distinctions. Within agentive functions, we need to identify a special class. Sometimes the agentive function assigned to an object is that standing for or representing something else. Thus, when I draw a diagram of a football play, I let certain circles stand for the quarterback, the running back, the offensive linemen, and so on. In a case of agentive functions, assigned to the marks on the paper is that representing or standing for. But because representing and standing for are just another name of intentionally, in this case we have intentionally imposed intentionally on an object and states and affairs that are not interestingly intentional. There are names in English for a result of this type of imposition of functions. They are called meaning or symbol. Marks on the paper now have meaning in a way that screwdrivers, for example, do not have a meaning because the marks on a paper now stand for or represents the object and states of affairs independent of themselves. The most famous sort of meanings are, of course, in language. The most famous sort of meaning, of course, in language, and in the use of language we impose a specific function, namely that are representing onto marks and sound. I said earlier that the capacity to impose a function on a natural phenomena was remarkable, but equally remarkable is the fact that functions may be imposed quite unconsciously, and the functions once imposed are often, so to speak, invisible. So, for example, money may simply have evolved without anyone ever thinking we are now impose a new function on these objects. And once the money has evolved, many people use money to buy and sell without thinking about the logical structure of imposed function. However, for all cases of agentive functions, someone must have been capable of understanding what the thing is for, or a function could never be assigned. At least some of the participants in the system of exchange must understand, consciously or unconsciously, that money is to buy things with. Screwdrivers are for driving screws and so forth. If we assign a function that is totally apart from human intention, it would have to fall in a category of non-agentive functions. Thus, suppose someone says that the intended agentive function of money is to serve a medium of exchange and a store of value, but money also serves the hidden secret, unintended function of maintaining the system of power relationships in society. The first claim is about intentionality of agentive function, and the second claim is about non-agentive function. To see this, simply ask yourself, what fact in the world would make each claim true? The first claim is made true by the intentionality with which agent use object as a money. They use it for the purpose of buying, selling, storing values. The second claim, like claim that the heart function to a pump blood, would be true if only if there is a set of unintended causal relations and these serve some tautology. Even if it is not a tautology shared by the speaker, some social scientists speak for the distinction between a manifest and a latent function. If this distinction parallel the distinction I have been making, then manifest function are agentive function, manifest functions are agentive functions, and the latent function are non-agentive.